So we did the facings for our blocks, creating facings, but we've got a back dart in it, and we made our facings with the back dart. Now this will be quite bulky on the inside of the garment. So the outside of the garment, it's joined to the bodice, so it's still visible. So this will be sewn. It could be any type of dart. This is sewn as your dart, and obviously that closes it up. So that section, that dart there, actually is removed. When you sew it as a dart, they're removed. So when we've got the facing, we don't need that dart to be in there because it goes all the way down to the bottom. So in this instance, I can close that dart out, cut along the dart leg because it goes all the way to the bottom edge of my facing, and close it. And then I've reduced the bulk from my facing. So that was where I had it around. My facing happens to be at the bottom. It could have been a bit higher. If it was below, I would just reduce the depth of my facing just to make it go there, because this is a nice combined facing. It's got the neck and the armhole together, and it just shapes quite nicely around there. So I will just cut along one of the dart legs. That's my dart. Obviously that's a sewing line, that's a sewing line, so we're removing the fabric. So we can just remove it from the pattern piece, and we don't need to have a seam or anything there. This has already got the seam allowances on it from when we traced it. So you can see now that when it's flat, it doesn't look like it fits because the underneath has got the dart in it. But when the dart's sewn out, obviously allow that to stand up, the new facing piece with the dart removed will fit the body the same as when that's sewn with its own dart in it. So I would remove the dart from the facing but keep it in, that's the shoulder dart on the back, and that would be the same if you had a bust dart but that was up in the armhole. Now what about if we had a princess seam? So if we had our pattern and it was in two pieces, so this is our princess seam, this is just the front one I've just selected, and I want to make a combined facing, I don't need to make the facing in two pieces because I can lay, this has got my seam allowances on, so if your pattern hasn't got seam allowances, draw your correct seam allowances on, and then you lay again them on the sewing line, that's its sewing line, so you lay that on to the sewing line like this, and then I can draw around it and create a combined facing all in one. So I would start by drawing around my front, or whatever pieces you've got, your panelled pieces, if we've altered anything on the bodice. That would be my front, just draw around there. I know this has all got my seam allowances on, I've kept my seam allowances on. On this edge that I know that they're going to join, I'm just going to say, well that's my seam allowance, that's my sewing line, I've taken that off. Now when you're laying patterns on, you want to lay the sewing line to the sewing line. So if my seam allowance is 1 centimetre, I come in 1 centimetre to the sewing line, and then I can do another mark for the additional seam allowance, so I can just lay that one on top. So if it was a 1.5, I would draw a line 3 centimetres, seam allowance, because you're just basically removing, and there's the sewing line. But these patterns I want to keep because these are my actual patterns, I'm just making a new facing. You could just lay that on there, and if you've got the tissue paper patterns, you're just laying the sewing lines on top of each other. So you're effectively removing the seam allowances. So then when I lay those on, I can then trace the second panel, join it together. So I'm just removing that seam. I can do it because my facing is only going to be this big. It's not going anywhere where the suppression is, where the darts are, because you can see there's a width, the gap there, so that's its dart. So I can remove the bulk from the facing and then measure out equally my facing, my combined facing, where I need it to be. And draw that in, find that nice shape and draw that. So remember that you've got your seam allowance all the way around this edge here, but this underneath that we can give it a notch, so we know that this is when that facing then joins onto a sewn one, it will fit nicely. I'll quickly cut that out to show you how, if you can, on a facing, because it's a style line and it's a fit line on the garment, but if you're making your own facing and it happens to be in panels, it's just showing you how you can join the two pieces together to remove any bulkiness. You don't want seams on seams under the facing, or like on the back shoulder of the darts. There we are, cut that round. So then this is the facing. So when we join our two pieces together along the sewing line, I'll just pop some pins in to show you what I'm talking about. That would be us sewing our pieces together. So that's the sewing line along the seam allowance, and that would open up, and that would be your finished garment there. And then that facing hasn't got a seam in it, so it means it's reduced the bulk. And then you've got a new facing, and it's actually pulled out properly, that matches. So how to remove seams and how to remove darts when you're creating facings. Just close the dart out to reduce any bulk.